As adults, it's up to us to make adult development or human evolution happen. But the real adult development, according to the Eastern science traditions, is the transmutation of our dimensional existence. And they state that human evolution in its most authentic sense has little or nothing to do with what we typically think human evolution is. Developing beyond the dimension of the experience of the ordinary material world of the psychophysical and moving instead into the extraordinary realms of the supra-mental is what the Eastern science traditions say is the ultimate goal of human development and represents true human evolution. Therefore, coming closer to understanding the supra-mental states and therefore the profound implications of the ultimate states of human potential is the most important work of adult development. The Eastern texts also say there are basically two reasons for accomplishing this development. One is living in a state of identity with our true nature, absolute consciousness, and the other is acquiring the supernormal powers such as clairaudience, clairvoyance, omniscience, and the rest. These traditions, however, warn against focusing on this supernormal powers part because they can be a potential distraction from the real point of this human life exercise, attaining the state in which we're meant to be living. This slide is a brief depiction of the model of a human being according to Kashmir Shaivism. It's an Eastern science tradition. In the middle, to the lower realms, is where most of us live most of the time, in the states of the mental and physical world. But in the higher realms are the states in which we're meant to live, with the topmost being the ultimate state of who we really are. In Kashmir Shaivism and most other Eastern traditions, it's said that the mind and ego keep us bound to a very limited state of consciousness compared to our essential nature. A contemporary sage commented that attaining the state of the self, the top states, Paramashiva, Shiva Shakti, is worth it just for the emotional stability, which provides freedom from fear and negative emotions, and think psychoneuroimmunology. Kundalini is an evolutionary power. The energy that's said to power this human evolution is called Kundalini. It's the conscious cosmic force in the body that's key to this adult development. And here's a good working definition. It's the primordial Shakti or cosmic energy that lies coiled, which means basically at rest or static or potential, in the energy center at the base of the spine, the Muladhara chakra, of every individual. When awakened, it begins to move upward within the subtle central channel called the Sushumna, Sanskrit term, piercing the chakras and initiating various yogic processes which bring about total purification and rejuvenation of the entire being. When Kundalini enters the Sahasrara, the spiritual center in the crown of the head, the individual self merges in the universal self and attains the state of self-realization. I'm going to do a very brief summary of a study that employed DC potential measurements to study mental healing, with the premise that DC potentials are likely to be the same as or closely similar to prana or chi. This is to lay the groundwork for an anomalous event that occurred during the study, where the initial questions going into the study were instigated by the notion of promoting progress in health and well-being. Questions after the anomalous event occurred began to shift, at first to the generic, what the bleep was that? I designed a study around healing, since when a meditator meditates and a healer heals, the Nadi meridian system is that which is affected or activated. Prana is the energy said to flow through the Nadi system in the Eastern science traditions. Correspondingly, Chi is that energy said to flow through the meridian system in acupuncture therapy, a theory rather. So if DC and prana were to turn out to be the same, I reasoned that I should get some indication of that by looking at what happens to the DC potential readings, especially if I took them continuously in real time and simultaneously from a point on the skin on the body that corresponded to a relatively loud acupuncture point, Hoku, and from a point not on any acupoint representing the flow of activity in the, quote, rest of the body. The subject's tasks alternated, with a sequence being a baseline session, an external focus, a healing, another external focus, and a final healing. To get some potentially crucial complementary data after each epoch of baseline, external focus, healing, etc., I asked the study subjects to, as best they could, graph for me on an XY axis, as you see on the slide on the right, the felt sense graph, their feeling of flow during each of the segments. On the left, you see the actual electronic output. And if I got into a little more detail, which I'll just do real quick, the timing of those curves and the peaks on the curves are extremely close to each other. So the felt sense, and I'll explain in a minute how that came about, actually paralleled the electronic meridian data, but not the non-meridian data. In a nutshell, the experimental setup was as pictured here, with the experimenter, who was me, standing behind the subject, taking data from meters attached to the equipment and being on movement artifact detail the whole time. 2 different top-of-the-line biofeedback machines with the capability of taking DC potential readings without using an input current in order to obtain the most pure form of DC from the body were used as monitoring devices. One machine was attached to the on-acupoint A, Hoku location, the other attached to a non-acupoint location, which was a point often away from any acupoints and meridians. That presented the activity of it represented the activity of prana in the rest of the body, i.e., not in the meridian or nadi system. As far as hypothesis and results went, it was expected that most of the predicted action would be on the acupoint data, but not on the non-acupoint data that was labeled N. Acupoint was A, non-acupoint was N. Second, that it would show up during healing, but not during non-healing activity, this action. And 3, that the effects would be stronger or more pronounced for the healing practitioners than for the control subjects. Overall, these expected results did indeed occur. I pushed my button and it didn't change. Should I go back? Or should I try pushing it again?
Try pushing it again.
It's not moving. Uh-oh. This is not good. I'm like 2 ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It's stuck. More technical difficulties.
Where are we? Right there? That's where you want to be, right?
I want to be at the next one.
Well.
That's where I got stuck. There we go. See if that shows up. Phew. There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Back on track. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Where was I? The continuous real-time DC potential data in graphic format exhibited certain expected patterns, rather. 3 possible patterns of the flow of prana were hypothesized to be smooth versus variable, a degree and definition of slope difference, and a converging or diverging or remain parallel behavior between the two, between the A and the N readings. Now, you probably can't see real well from where you are because I'm not sure these are big enough, but the crosses represent the non-meridian data, the boxes are the meridian data. So you see that jumpiness, which is, well, it's not smooth. It smooths out. This is in one of the external focus sessions. This is in the first healing session. So the data does smooth out. There's a slope to the data that wasn't in here that well defined. And the acupoint data comes up to meet, so to speak, the non-meridian data. And this was the converge, diverge versus remain parallel. So, and in the second set of focus and heal, you see the same kind of thing. The subject went back to being very jumpy on the meridian. Actually, they were also jumpy this time on the non-meridian. But then the meridian point, which I'm losing on this, but shows the same kind of behavior as it did the first time around. As an example of all of the pattern data, this subject slide shows the acupoint graph displaying the patterns previously mentioned, where, let's see, this is the one with, am I skipping again? No, this is okay. From the left to the right, what this is the non-acupoint data is across the top, the acupoint data is across the bottom. And on the right, there's a felt sense graph that the subject was going to draw for me, showing me a feeling of flow in that person during the treatment that they were doing. And you can see it followed the line. It was pretty flat. The graph that the person drew followed the line of the acupoint. At the bottom, on the healing session, where you see this nice curve with those peaks, take my word for it, I calculated it out. The peaks on the right for where the person was showing they went either increased or decreased actually correspond in time with the ones on the left. And this person in particular could do meditation versus healing. They could feel both kinds of energy and actually draw them for me. Not everybody could do that particular thing. Okay. In order to determine are DC potentials really the same as prana and chi, inherent in Kashmir Shaivism is the notion of the transmutation of prana. It's a key element in attaining the state of absolute consciousness. Swami Vishnu Tirth was an Eastern sage with a knowledge of a number of Eastern science traditions and was also a brilliant mathematician in his early life. Regarding prana, he notes, in the case of ordinary persons or persons in ordinary states of consciousness, this power, prana, works in a dormant condition and appears as an autonomous nervous impulse or an ANS impulse. But a yogi, or one who is performing yogic practices, such as meditation and others, brings its flow under the control of his will and can transmit it out of his person to another, as in healing. Vishnu Tirth is essentially saying that prana is in a dormant state when we are in an ordinary waking, externally focused state, and it is an autonomic nervous system impulse. So it registers as an ANS signal, which is what would be measured under these circumstances. Therefore, in the present DC potential study, the on-meridian A pattern is essentially an identifying pattern of the ordinary externally focused state and an ANS signal. However, when prana is affected by spiritual practices, the prana flow is reversed and moves toward the inner realms, resulting in a non-ordinary internal state. Under this condition, one would be measuring prana. For the purposes of this study, when the subjects are engaged in healing, which is an internally focused psychospiritual practice in this case, the focus is internal, and furthermore, when the subjects are in an internally focused state, the on-meridian DC potential pattern is a measurement in the form that the pattern is identifying the measurement of prana. So to summarize that, in this case, the what that's being measured depends on the when rather than the what itself. Depending on when you measure, you're either measuring the ANS or you're measuring prana. The difference represents a reversal in the outward flow of prana and its inward turn away from its typical outward flow. With this occurrence, prana is in a dormant state as an ANS impulse and signal, and it transmutes to a higher form of energy in the active state that represents a higher state of consciousness as well. Okay, now here's the anomaly. The DC data reversed in this particular case, and as been shown in the plan study, all the action as predicted was on the A graph, but if you notice here, it's not the case. This one was an extremely obvious exception for a control subject and on a baseline epoch, a condition where pretty much nothing special was supposed to be happening. As can be seen from the slide of subject 114, the usually less active data graph N has taken on the characteristics of the usually more active data graph A and vice versa, while the felt sense graph for this session shows 3 pronounced peaks with the letters ONS not defined on the graph at the top of each. And it thus mirrors the N rather than the A, which is also the opposite of what happened before. The first ONS peak occurs at approximately the time when the N data takes on the appearance of the typical A data, that first really big drop you saw, as if subject 114's DC electrical body aspects were reversed and the non-meridian rest of the body aspect took the place of the on-meridian aspect. With the system of A and N simultaneous real-time measurement, the definitions of A and N have been A representing the meridian system and N representing the, quote, rest of the body, or everything but the meridian system. After a short period of time, this person's data begins to revert to the more typical pattern that emerged overall in the study, with the action on A, not on N. There was no doubt, however, that for as long as this reversal of ANN occurred, it marked an event that was extraordinary. It began extremely abruptly and faded away just about as fast. The subject explained that the ONS on the felt sense graph represented a set of Sanskrit syllables or mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, and that she had experienced this mantra arising spontaneously from within several times, and that there was a humming perceived as well. Subject 114 seemed very calm and quiet in her demeanor, but that was kind of normal with this subject. At that point, didn't say much more and agreed to go on with the experiment. The placement of subject 114's ONS labels on the felt sense graphs were peaks at or near the completely present level. You can see on the left there. Both the spontaneous upwelling of ONS and the humming sound were phenomena the subject had experienced a number of times prior to this, but this time she just happened to be hooked up to electrodes. The subject reported on another occasion in questionnaire data that she had received Shaktipat initiation from a traditional Shaktipat master some years ago. The subject had also reported being a lay teacher in this tradition and one of the first for some time. So what did happen in this anomalous event? How can it be explained, and what does it have to do with adult human development? What has been up to now called simply the anomaly has been described both by the data and by information given by the subject about the subjective experience of that anomalous epoch or piece. To understand what happened here does require the perspective of the Eastern science traditions, especially with this subject's reported level of involvement and practice in one of these traditions. Along with that goes the necessity for as clear an understanding as possible of the Sanskrit terminology that's not often very easily accurately translated into English. Subject 114, as I said, had received Shaktipat from a traditional Eastern master. In addition, those Sanskrit syllables, Om and Namah Shivaya, that 114 reported had come up from within and were expressed on her felt sense graph as peaks. They're also associated with Kundalini and Shaktipat, as is the humming sound that was reported as well. To elaborate further on these phenomena, I want to take a quick look at Kundalini. How then is Kundalini awakened? The Eastern texts tell us that it can happen in one of three ways: through certain hatha yoga postures and breathing exercises, through concentrated meditation and other practices, or through the transmission of energy from a teacher. Kundalini has also been known to come awake spontaneously. Traditional texts say that the most natural and safe means of awakening Kundalini is through the transmission of energy from a teacher whose own Kundalini is fully developed. This process is called Shaktipat, that's what that word meant, in the Shaiva Yoga tradition of India, and it's rare but extremely effective. When the teacher activates the energy, a connection is formed between the teacher and the student, and it makes the energy regulated and guided. This activation can be thought of in terms of the EM phenomena of induction, where current flowing in a coil or a person, being, of higher potential will induce a current in the nearby coil of lower potential. Another scholar in the Kashmir Shaivism tradition and an authority in the area of Kundalini states that ancient sages discovered particular Sanskrit syllables or combinations, like Om and Namah Shivaya, which create within that central channel, the Sushumna Nadi it's called, powerful vibrations capable of awakening or activating or reversing the direction of its flow, calling it Kundalini. This Kundalini awakening eventually culminates in realization of the absolute or identification with the ultimate reality or the self. Furthermore, the Yoga Sutras on Shaktipat lists 4 broad classifications of Shaktipat according to the ways in which it manifests. One of these is called Vedamayi and includes inner divine sounds such as a humming sound, as the humming of bees. So far it appears that subject 114 had a spontaneous experience of Shaktipat and Kundalini while hooked up to the equipment on my baseline epoch of the study. And since I've only got one more minute, if you want to know more about how I kind of lost my place when I lost my timing there, about how this comes about, you can ask me questions. But there are several more explanations in the ancient Eastern traditions. The Samavesla, which is, it's a very quick and fast activity of self-realization. Everything about this person's experience had a hallmark, a recorded hallmark in different, even different traditions, literature, of an experience of the highest level of the self. And it's something that couldn't be planned. It happened spontaneously, unexpectedly. This wasn't the point of the study. The point of the study, as I said before, was looking to see if there was a relationship between acupuncture, the chi of acupuncture, the prana of the NADIS system in the Eastern traditions, and DC potentials. And there does appear to be. And it also has an association with being able to see what happens to people bioelectrically, so to speak, when they have one of these higher experienced states of consciousness. Thank you.
As usual, we've got our question and answer period, so we've got a few minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please line up as before, and remember to mention your name.
I'm Bob Patterson. My questions was exactly on the electrodes. Where were they placed? I mean, I assume you're measuring a potential difference. And so you got one electrode on the meridian. Is the other electrode that on the active side on the meridian also? And also, what kind of electrodes did you use? Was there any skin preparation?
Yeah, those were all, it would have taken me probably another hour and a half to tell you all the details about the preparation of the initial study. I used two top-of-the-line biofeedback devices, one connected to the Hoku meridian point and one connected to a point off of any meridian or acupoint. And they were special machines, the cabling was special, the electrode was special. I had an agar salt gel bridge so that it would get rid of the moisture artifact. There were, if you want to know, maybe later I can, there's a whole encyclopedia of stuff I had designed in this study to be able to do that. Yes?
Thank you for introducing the ancient science of yoga
You're
in
welcome.
your talk. My name is Vijay Gupta. I am at the University of Colorado.
Uh-huh.
I'm also the president of an organization that you have not heard about. It's called World Community Service Center.
Uh-huh.
It is based in India,
Huh.
and we have now established a branch in US. Reason I am saying this is that there have been, in the last 50 years, a set of developments by a sage scientist who is not in body anymore, who systematized the practice of Kundalini meditation, just called simplified Kundalini meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be very happy to meet with you and talk about it, that how Kundalini can be not only raised, but controlled so that it does not create side effects, and how you can reach the state of highest consciousness systematically. So these things are taught.
Yes,
And
yes.
the work that you're
yes.
doing, I think there is an incredible collaboration possibility. So we would love to spend some time and talk about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Is there another
Yeah,
question? We got
go
time
ahead.
for one more.
Go ahead.
If it's quick. Yeah.
My name's Emery Mort. I'm not sure if you heard the last presentation before you. Were you-
Just a very small part of it. Unfortunately, I really wanted to hear it, but I had my own organizing I was doing. behind the scenes.
So my question is, they're approaching the spine, let's say, and the human organism in two totally different ways. Are there any ways that you personally, through your research and your understanding, can sort of synthesize two very different approaches, one based on minerals and vitamins, and a different approach based on sort of accessing this pranic energy and Kundalini type of energy through meditation and devoted practices?
They're I'm sure there are links. I never really thought about that. I do know that any traditional teacher will caution students to be sure that they're watching their diet, they're keeping their energy up, they're getting good nutrition, especially when this process kicks in. Because if anybody's ever had any of these experiences, they can be really intense, and you literally burn sometimes a lot. You can feel
Yeah.
that kind of energy.
Yeah, I actually have, personally, I have a lot of these types of experiences, so.
Yeah, it would be it's an interesting idea, and if you want to talk about it later, I'm open to do that. But yeah, nutrition in general, nutrition and these kinds. I had a colleague one time when her meditation master was in town. Her standard joke was, "Aha, I guess I better stock up on vitamins and minerals," because she knew she knew what would happen. It's not a bad thing. It's just that a lot of your own energy, so to speak, is being activated. You're going through lots of processes that you don't normally. It's almost like being an athlete and having to really, you're going for the Olympics, and you're having to eat certain things and watch your diet and whatever. So for this period of time, while this person is in the transition zone of moving up the states of consciousness, especially, the diet needs to be watched.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Please join me in thanking Maria.